Hello. Um, well, what is there to say about the current U.S. political situation? Donald Trump returning to power. Nothing good. And, before anyone starts thinking that I am some special place in my heart of love for the Democratic Party and Joe Biden, Joe War Criminal Biden, in his stubborn, selfish refusal to step down way before he actually did, after that completely disastrous debate performance and clear neurological disorder, whether it's age-related cognitive decline, Parkinson's disease, as one neurologist said. If I was asking my students to observe this behavior, I would expect them to give the answer of Parkinson's disease, but I don't know what it is he has, but he's clearly the ideal. The people around him pressuring him to stay in the race. Well, he can't finish a sentence, or just in the gaslighting from the media, and from Chuck Schumer, and from everyone. He is, and it was just ridiculous. With his own internal polling showing him losing, what was it, 400 electoral college votes? Yeah. The guy is one of the worst presidents in well, I won't say that. I don't. But yet, just the complete acquiescence to the Israeli government and Benjamin Netanyahu carpet bombing whole swaths of Gaza indiscriminately, engaging in what became clear, at least after the first month or two, that this was a genocide or ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And now numerous human rights organizations, Amnesty International, the founder of Human Rights Watch, one of the founders, who is a Jewish and had to flee Germany in the 1930s, just kept on sending the weapons, sending the funds, almost 30 billion in total. Complete disgrace. But what is Donald Trump gonna do? Just completely turn the U.S. into a sort of theocratic, ultra-nationalist I'd say turn into a plutocratic oligarchy, but this country already is a plutocratic oligarchy. There have been studies conducted by, I believe it was Princeton University, several years back now, just concluding that the U.S. is an oligarchy, that you can look at the policy preferences of the average American versus the wealthiest 1%. The CEOs and the Wall Street executives and so on. And you see basically their preferences are met by the government. Things that have wide support in the U.S., such as some sort of universal healthcare system, paid sick leave, greater worker rights and protections, those don't get passed. Of course, with Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, you get all this, and there were court decisions prior to that going back to the 80s. All this corporate money can flow into political campaigns. You essentially have legalized bribery or legalized corruption. The insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the big oil, political candidates are just flooded with this money, and the biggest both Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi have benefited greatly from this whole system. And literally nothing changes. I keep hearing people voted for Trump because of economic insecurity or economic the inflation, the price of groceries. Okay, what exactly is Trump gonna do about it? He signed a whole bunch of executive orders, nothing to do with inflation, nothing to do with anything but actually raising the price of prescription drugs. Just crack down on legal immigrants, those who are utilizing a app and going through the legal process. These were Cubans, Venezuelans, and Haitians. And blocking a bunch of Afghan refugees who had helped the U.S. in Afghanistan risk their lives in doing so, had already gone through the process and were waiting to be resettled in the U.S. And Trump just says, nah, fuck you. Get killed by the Taliban for all I care. Yeah. Designating the Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations so that the U.S. can turn the war on drugs into an actual full-blown war with troops on the ground in Mexico, or drone strikes or bombings in Mexico, which the government of Mexico is categorically, unequivocally against and opposed to. This would be illegal. The drug does not meet the definition of terrorist. Doesn't understand the first thing about why fentanyl is on the rise, the iron law of prohibition, as it is called. Let me just read some of this article from 2016 from The Guardian entitled, "Street Opioids Are Getting Deadlier. Overseeing drug use can reduce deaths." And this one section, as health officials battle increasing mortality associated with heroin and prescription opioids, even more dangerous group of street drugs has appeared on scene. From Seattle to Syracuse, authorities are reporting a spike in overdoses of fentanyl, an opioid 25 to 50 times stronger than heroin. In Canada, 4 pounds of a drug called W18, which is 100 times stronger than fentanyl, were recently seized. These drugs, which act so quickly that they can be used in anesthesia, are now being made in clandestine Chinese and American labs. Fentanyl and similar derivatives are are then sold either as heroin in the form of fake OxyContin pills, or scarily, sometimes even in pills made to look like anti-anxiety medications such as Xanax. The problem has caught law enforcement officials and politicians off guard, but to anyone who studied the history of drug policy, it was completely predictable. It's known as the Iron Law of Prohibition, or as activist Richard Corrin, who coined the term, put it, the harder the enforcement, the harder the drugs. It's been demonstrated throughout the history of drug policy. The more authorities target a class of drugs, the more potent and dangerous the versions on the street become. Under alcohol prohibition, bootleggers prefer to sell whiskey and gin, not beer and wine. During the cocaine years, dealers switched from selling powder that was used typically for snorting to selling crack, which can only be smoked, in a much more addictive way of using the drug. From a dealer's business perspective, then, switching to fentanyl makes total sense. The smaller amount needed to get high, the tinier each package is, and the lower the risk of getting busted. But from a public health perspective, it's a disaster. At least prescription drug misusers who get pharmaceuticals from doctors receive drugs of a known dose and purity, far from the case in street heroin or pills. When users substitute street fentanyl, it can cause an overdose so quickly there is little time to intervene and save a life. Pharmaceutical forms of fentanyl exist, but the kind found on the street has to be illegally produced. And cracking down on doctors who prescribe opioids without boosting treatment for addicts will only grow street drug demand. And we've seen exactly this. So yeah. No account is made for the demand of the drugs, the war on drugs, the prohibition creates these criminal syndicates, as we saw during the Prohibition years in the 1920s, when the temperance movement succeeded in having a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol. And the same applies to heroin. The whole reason these cartels exist is because of drug prohibition. And where do these cartels get their guns? And from who? They have connections to Americans who can take advantage of our extremely loose, unregulated policy on guns, including semi-automatic and fully automatic assault weapons, right on the border in Texas and Arizona, and then transport these guns to Mexico. And this is essentially, what is it? It's 98% of all the guns seized by Mexican police from cartel bust originate in the U.S. And then you have this strategy of the U.S. and Mexican government already pursued this strategy of decapitation, as it's called. You take out the top leaders of cartels, and there were like a few families, I guess, who were in the that were the major cartels. You take out these big bosses like El Chapo, for instance, and then what happens? The cartels, they just end up splintering off into even more, you could say, even more violent, less organized, more competition for territory, because there's now a greater number of cartels. The old truces that were signed between the two big cartels are now gone. And you just have a dramatic escalation of violence and bloodshed throughout Mexico. And things have gotten... There's no question that the policy of just going in there and taking out the leaders or top heads. Not that these are good, upstanding, moral people, of course not, but I mean, it's kind of like thinking that the military that militarily invading Iraq and capturing Saddam Hussein is going to lead to amazing results. Clearly that it wasn't the case. And then you have Donald Trump. I'm against the neocons. He went to the Libertarian convention, and I'm gonna fight the neocons and against the wars. We're gonna stop this war in Ukraine. All the wars. The Chinese are war criminals. The Chinese. No new wars. Really, what is the record from Trump's first term regarding on foreign policy? Because this idea that Trump is this anti-imperialist dove, peace-oriented foreign policy, is just one of the biggest lies and myths being disseminated. The media never seems to actually review his extremely hawkish record. I mean, he increased the drone strikes by over 430% while in the Oval Office. And he didn't end. This was in like the first January 1st, 2020. He carried out that illegal assassination of Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani, a guy who was on the ground fighting ISIS. The U.S. essentially acted as an air force for ISIS. He was on his way. He was in a convoy in Iraq, heading to to meet for peace talks with Saudi Arabian negotiators. And then immediately after that, Trump was on Twitter saying, what is it? I have a list of 52 cultural sites to be destroyed. And then somehow he's got the idea of the assassination attempt back in July was that Iran had something to do with it. He was saying about blowing Iran to smithereens. He's appointed Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, a huge warmongering hawk. Wants coups in Venezuela, even more tighter sanctions on Cuba, as if Cuba hasn't been sanctioned and embargoed enough. I was thinking of like what if we flip the tables and because of Trump coming into office, a bunch of countries got together and put an embargo on the U.S. One of the harshest sanctions regimes is currently on Cuba. Just apply that to the U.S. Imagine how all these people who cheerlead for the embargo on Cuba, many of them Cubans in Florida, who voted for Trump in large numbers, would feel. Yeah. They dropped more bombs in the first 2 years, and then Obama's entire 8-year tenure, civilian deaths in Afghanistan rose 300% when he was commander-in-chief. In 2019 was the single deadliest year of the war. He's to the right of Biden on unconditionally backing the genocidal mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, absurdly claiming Biden is not sending enough weapons and calling all these long-time Israel supporters like Chuck Schumer pro-Hamas, and he's received hundreds of millions from Miriam Adelson. And if you remember from his last term, he basically just had this list from Sheldon Adelson about withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And he did that, declaring / recognizing the illegally occupied Golan Heights in Syria as part of Israel. He did that, inflaming tensions by moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He did that. The Abraham Accords, which was this whole to get a whole bunch of countries in the Arab world to normalize relations with Israel, but to completely forget about the Palestinians and a Palestinian state, and just say, forget about you, you're going to be forever occupied. The Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Morocco, none of these countries are going to care anymore. And all of this was some of the reasons why the Hamas attack happened. Direct result of policies in the Levant that Trump endorsed. He's only in Ukraine where he speaks of entering into honest negotiations and bringing about some resolution and end to the war. But as much as Trump speaks about Biden leading us down the path to nuclear annihilation, it was he who ripped up the historic arms control agreements, such as the Intermediate Nuclear Forces and Open Skies Treaty that was signed by Reagan and Gorbachev in 1987. The INF was. It's not exactly war, but how fucking peaceful is applying the death penalty to those who sell drugs, endorsing summary execution for shoplifting? But I'm sure the CEO of Liquor Barn will be lined up against the wall to be shot by the firing squads. Law and order. We need law and order. We gotta send the military out to shoot protesters in the legs. Oh, just pardons every single violent rioter who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Yeah, all of them. Just a blanket pardon. The other day. Yesterday. Even those that were tasing police officers and causing heart attacks and they're brave patriots and they're hostages, they're political prisoners. Now he doesn't have any, guess you could say, sane heads to check him. Generals who wouldn't follow through on an order to invoke the Insurrection Act against American protesters and send the military to go full Tiananmen Square. But he's for free speech, he's the First Amendment defender. Kamala Harris wants to censor everyone. It's censorship. Really, his Agenda 47 platform says, deport all pro-Hamas, which means pro-Palestinian demonstrators and protesters. If you're against war, if you're protesting for Palestinian rights, if you're exercising your First Amendment right, the guarantee of free speech, he wants to deport you. He sued, before his president, he sued Bill Maher over a joke. And he had journalists arrested and charged them with felony rioting. He wanted the reporters who broke the leak, reported on the Supreme Court Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade. He wanted them imprisoned. He wants to make burning the American flag punishable with up to 1 year in prison, which this was a case in the 1980s where the Supreme Court decided, even with ultra-conservative Justice Antonin Scalia siding with the majority, that burning the flag is constitutionally protected speech. Project 2025 wants to ban pornography, ban comprehensive scientific sex education, say that if you even talk about transgender people existing, that you're a sexual predator and need to be dealt with. I have nothing to do with Project 2025. It's like all members of his, a year, spoken to the Heritage Foundation. He's had his people in his administration who wrote the Project 2025 document. He's mentioned up to 300 or so times in the document. What's this thing? This hasn't never heard about it. And I go on. Now he's not some freedom of speech, First Amendment defender. He signed like the extradition warrant for Julian Assange. He never pardoned Edward Snowden. Of course, Obama had the record for prosecuting using the Espionage Act. I don't know if Trump exceeded or broke that record or not. Probably will in this term. just have to see his fucking face all that time. God damn. Just lie after lie after lie. I was just watching a clip of him signing an executive order to eliminate birthright citizenship, which is in the 14th Amendment. And as you know, we're the only country that does birthright citizenship. False, lie. I mean, you need like a constant, like, family feud with the exes. Lie, lie, distortion, misinformation, missing context. Every time he opens his mouth. But all the politicians lie. Yes, they do lie a lot. But there's a thing called degrees and scales. Again, some people voted for him because they think he's authentic. Because the government is constantly lying. Our institutions have been so discredited. The Supreme Court is just a theocratic, reactionary organ of the Vatican at this point. Bush just completely lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and Saddam Hussein having ties to Al Qaeda. A bunch of the Obama administration was arming jihadists, Salafist groups, Al-Nusra, which later became HTS, and calling them moderate rebels, and they were kidnapping and beheading people. Yeah, but now even just the veneer of civility and decorum is completely gone. It's just, there's something there's no longer talk of, I mean, it's just out in the open, naked imperialism. We're gonna take over Greenland, military force, and it's possible, we're gonna have to put some tariffs on, put some pressure on Denmark, because this is absolutely necessary to our economic interest. I don't know what's worse, that or the whole we really care about the Syrian people because of human rights abuses by Assad. President Bashar al-Assad is the lesser evil and the better choice than the groups being funded by the US, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and so on. That's kind of a red flag. Okay, but I don't want to go on and on forever with this, and see you next time. If there is a next time.